This is allegedly a real photo taken by serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer in 1991. It's too graphic to show on YouTube. One set of photos I'm able to show, although they aren't any less disturbing, are from serial killer Robert Ben Rhoades. Born on November 22nd, 1945, Robert Ben Rhoades is an American serial killer known as the Truck Stop Killer. Rhoades had what some recounted as a normal upbringing until he joined the Marines in 1964 and was later dishonorably discharged for involvement with an alleged robbery. During this time, his father, who was also a military veteran, was arrested for assaulting a 12-year-old girl and would eventually end his own life while awaiting trial. Rhoades would go on to marry 3 separate times and have a son with his first wife. At the time, he would find work as a trucker, transporting cargo for long distances. However, Rhoades would develop an interest in the BDSM scene and even converted the cabin of his truck into what some would describe as his own personal torture chamber. After completing it, he would start targeting hitchhikers and sex workers. Reportedly, his first confirmed victims were a married couple in 1990. The two were hitchhiking, and almost immediately after being picked up by Rhoades, Douglas Sikowski would be murdered. His wife, Patricia Walsh, would be kept by Rhoades and tortured for over a week before she too would be murdered. A month later, he would kidnap Shauna Holtz, an 18-year-old who would escape, but ultimately declined to press charges since, as she put it, it was her word against his. Reportedly, only days later, he would pick up Regina K. Walters and her boyfriend, killing her boyfriend immediately and torturing 14-year-old Regina as he had to others. It was during this time that Rhoades would take these photos of Regina. It was later determined based on the photos that Rhoades likely held Regina for a lengthy amount of time. However, she was ultimately unable to escape and was later found dead on March 3, 1991. On the morning of April 1, 1980, Arizona Highway Patrol would find Rhoades in his cabin on the side of the road, with a naked woman, later identified as Kathleen Vine, handcuffed, who would be arrested and charged with aggravated assault, sexual assault, and unlawful imprisonment. Upon searching his home, the police would find photos both of Walters and Walsh, resulting in him being convicted of first-degree murder for the death of Regina, who would be sentenced to life in prison. Over the next decade, Rhoades would be extradited from state to state, narrowly escaping the death penalty in exchange for a second life sentence. Today, Rhoades is 76 years old and living out the rest of his life in a maximum security prison in Illinois. Earlier, I asked my subscribers if they ever caught anything disturbing on camera, and thankfully, 86% of you said no. But for the 14% of you that did, I hope it wasn't anything like this next case. Born March 9, 1945, Dennis Rader is an American serial killer, most famously known as the BTK Killer, which is a nickname he reportedly gave himself, meaning bind, torture, kill. Despite this being perhaps one of, if not the most well-documented killers on this list, for the sake of this video, I will not be diving too heavily into Rader's backstory, aside from some surface-level information. On January 15, 1974, Rader reportedly killed 4 members of a family living in Wichita, Kansas. He would then go on to kill 6 more between the years of 1974 to 1991. But although Rader was generally seen as an average guy, in fact, reportedly described as well-mannered by some, it was actually during these times that he wasn't killing that we have to thank for these chilling photographs. Rader would describe this time as his cooling off period, the time he spent in between murders. He would spend this time taking photos of himself, dressed up in women's clothing, tied up and bound with ropes, the entire time wearing a female mask. Some bindings growing incredibly complex, with one even featuring him being buried alive. These, however, were likely not photos that he wanted to keep to himself, as Rader seemed to make a habit out of bragging about his crimes to the media. In fact, that is actually what led to his arrest. In 2004, the BTK Killer was considered a cold case, meaning the case remained unsolved and likely lacked very many leads, as Rader reportedly had not been killing for over 13 years. But he must have been getting antsy because he began contacting and taunting the media again, even claiming that he had chosen his next victim and had planned to kill again. However, Rhoades would send a floppy disk he believed to be untraceable to the media with metadata containing the name Dennis and the words Christ Lutheran Church, the church where Rhoades was president. Following some more evidence police were able to obtain, they were able to arrest and charge Rhoades with 10 counts of first-degree murder. He would ultimately plead guilty to these charges and be sentenced to 10 consecutive life sentences in El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas. Reportedly, he is kept in solitary confinement for his own protection and likely will be for the rest of his life. Although some photos of his crime scenes exist, and Rhoades reportedly took photos of the victims himself, I think these photos are disturbing enough. Killer unknown. I'll be upfront with you guys, the origin of this next photo is disputed, but reportedly some believe it to be of Tara Calico and Michael Heenley, two missing people from New Mexico. Tara was a 19-year-old girl who would ride her bike down New Mexico State Road 47 daily, but one day, she never returned, and although it is believed that she was kidnapped, no one would actually witness this. Michael had also disappeared while camping with his family some 75 miles from where Tara had disappeared. Both remained without leads until almost a year later, when a Polaroid photograph would be discovered in a Florida parking lot in a spot previously occupied by a windowless white Toyota van. After it would appear on a broadcast of a current affair that July, both the families of Tara and Michael would come forth and claim the woman and boy in that photograph were their missing children. Unfortunately, however, Michael's parents, although they said they were almost certain it was Michael in the photo, would be incorrect, since in June of 1990, Michael's body was found only about 7 miles from where the family had been camping. Police would conclude that Michael had likely wandered off and died from exposure. This would mean that the boy in the photograph would once again be unidentified. However, Tara's family felt certain about their assessment, citing a scar on her leg and the inclusion of what they claimed to be one of Tara's favorite books in the photo. Other photos have surfaced, some that have led people to believe that they too could be of Tara, but were ultimately found to be less plausible than the Toyota van photograph. Ultimately, that is where the trail mostly ends. In 1998, Tara was officially declared dead, a judge ruling her death a homicide. Although the case is still technically ongoing, and a handful of leads would allegedly pop up, no further ground would be made in locating Tara or identifying the boy in the photograph. This means that if they truly were abducted, their abductor has managed to escape paying for their crimes for over 3 decades. And as time goes on, as cruel as it may be, may never actually face justice. At the time of uploading, Tara has been missing for 34 years, 1 month, and 26 days. Anatoly Slifco. Born December 28, 1938, Anatoly Slifco was a Soviet serial killer known for the killing of 7 boys between the years of 1964 to 1985. As a teenager, Anatoly had made 2 discoveries, the first being that he believed that he was a homosexual, a fact that he kept hidden from his family, and 2, that he suffered from an erectile dysfunction. Despite this, however, he would end up getting married and have 2 kids, although he described his relationship with his wife as less than intimate. In 1961, he would witness a terrible traffic accident resulting in a drunk driver hitting a group of pedestrians, including a young boy in a Young Pioneers uniform, the Soviet equivalent of the Boy Scouts. The boy would ultimately end up being fatally injured, and let's just say the sight of this cured Anatoly's erectile dysfunction. Excited by the empowerment he felt watching this, he would go on to create his own youth club, and would receive praise for his efforts to educate the youth, including being awarded the title of Honored Teacher of the Soviet Union. Unknown to everyone, however, was that Anatoly was performing experiments on the boys in the club. Starting around 1963, Anatoly began to convince the boys to go through an experimental process of essentially hanging themselves, a process they understood would render them unconscious and be revived by Anatoly. They believed that this would stretch their spines, making them taller. Anatoly would record these experiments and assault the boys while they were unconscious. After reviving them, he would convince them to remain quiet, having no idea what Anatoly had done to them while they were unconscious. On the other hand, if he could not revive them, which was the case for 7 out of the 36 boys Anatoly reportedly did this to, he would dismember and burn their bodies. After investigators noticed several boys who attended this club had disappeared, they would find the films and photos Anatoly made of the hanging, assaulting, and dismemberment of the boys, and sentenced to death. Almost in a Silence of the Lambs style proceeding, however, while incarcerated, Anatoly would reportedly be interviewed by the investigators to help them attempt to track down another serial killer at large, before being executed on September 16, 1989, at the age of 50. Harvey Glatman. Born on December 10, 1927, Harvey Glatman was an American serial killer known as the Glamour Girl Slayer. Growing up in Colorado, Glatman would break into women's apartments, stealing personal items like lingerie, but eventually would begin stalking and assaulting women. In August of 1945, he would kidnap and assault a woman, for which he would be convicted and sentenced to 10 years in jail. Ultimately, however, he would be paroled after only 3 years. While in jail, he would be quoted as being diagnosed with a psychopathic personality. After moving to Los Angeles almost a decade later, Glatman began to contact models looking for work and offered to photograph them for a pulp fiction magazine. At this point, after tying the victims up, taking their photos and assaulting them, he would strangle the women before dumping their bodies into the desert. 2 such victims would be identified as Judith Dole and Ruth Mercado. Glatman would actually claim a 3rd victim who he had met through a personal ad in the newspaper, gaining him an additional nickname as the Lonely Hearts Killer. His 3rd victim would be identified as Shirley Ann Bridgeford. Thankfully, however, on Halloween night in 1958, after attempting to kidnap Lorraine Vigil, a woman Glatman intended to make his 4th victim, he would be spotted by police officers and arrested. He would ultimately end up confessing to the murders, as well as show officers the photos he took of the victims. He would only end up being found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, but would receive the death penalty, which would lead to his execution on September 18, 1959, at the age of 31, less than 1 year after his apprehension, and just about 2 years after claiming his first victim. Glatman is also believed to be the suspect in the murder of Dorothy Gay Howard in Boulder, Colorado in 1954, but this, however, was never proven. Well, that's it for now. Be sure to like the video to help the algorithm, and subscribe to see more content like this. If you enjoyed this video, why not check out this one, where I talk about 5 photos taken moments before tragedy. I'll see you next time.